Chapter 3, 1930s. Great Depression. The Great Depression was the worst economic crisis in modern history, lasting from 1929 until the beginning of World War II in 1939. The causes of the Great Depression included slowing consumer demand, mounting consumer debt, decreased industrial production, and the rapid and reckless expansion of the U.S. stock market. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, it triggered a crisis in the international economy. Impacts. Manufacturers cut production. Unemployment. USA unemployment rate exceeded 20% at its highest point. Unemployment began to rise as countries reduced their industrial output to pre-war levels. Protectionism. USA practiced protectionism, imposing high tariffs in order to protect its industries. In retaliation, many countries imposed tariffs of their own. To deflation. Debt payments. At the same time, countries had to repay their war debts. Soaring inflation, high unemployment, falling standards of living and limited prospects for the future. Political and social. These issues combined to cause anger and resentment amongst the unemployed and deprived. This raised concerns of a revolution in all countries, even those with long-standing democratic institutions. Bank runs. The USSR's and Comintern. The Bolsheviks' rise to power in Russia in November 1917 caused alarm across Europe. France and Britain were especially concerned, as they lost a vital ally when the new Russian government withdrew from the First World War by signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. It soon became clear that Lenin intended to spread revolution as far as possible. Russian agents and propaganda appeared in all the major European cities. In March 1919, communists from all over the world were invited to a conference in Moscow, which marked the inauguration of the Third International, or Comintern. Given the political and economic turmoil that faced Europe at this time, widespread revolution advocated by the communists seemed real. Some countries, including Britain, France, the USA, and Japan, actively supported the Bolsheviks' opponents in the Russian Civil War. By 1921, however, tensions had eased. Their hopes of a worldwide communist revolution under Russian leadership had not materialized. Lenin now accepted that Russia's future depended on peaceful The Comintern under Stalin. When a Comintern under Stalin directed the various communist parties to ally with any group that was anti-fascist, be it the Kuomintang, the British. Anti-fascism. The dynamics of Soviet foreign relations changed drastically after Stalin recognized the danger posed by Nazi Germany. From 1934 through 1937, the Soviet Union tried to restrain German militarism by building coalitions hostile to fascism. Attempts were made to secure agreements with Britain and France, but failed because both under the 1934-38 friendlier relations with the West. In the years between 1928 and 1934, the Soviet Union's foreign policy shifted from a period of isolationism and revolutionary fervor to a more pragmatic approach, seeking friendlier relations with the West. This shift was largely driven by Stalin's recognition of the growing threat from Nazi Germany and his desire to build coalitions against fascism. 1936 Defense Agreement with France. The agreement was intended to contain Nazi Germany by creating an alliance against it, and it was a key part of Soviet foreign policy in the 1930s. 1938 September Munich Conference. The 1938 Munich Conference, also known as the Munich Agreement, was a meeting between Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy in September 1938. The primary outcome was the agreement to allow Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, a territory inhabited by a large ethnic German population. This agreement was driven by a policy of appeasement, with the aim of avoiding war. 1939 Rejection of Polish-French-Prussian and USSR policy. In August 1939, Poland's refusal to allow Soviet troops on its territory led to the failure of negotiations between the USSR, France, and the UK. This in turn prompted the Soviet Union to accept Germany's proposal for a non-aggression pact. 1939 No Aggression Pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed on August 23, 1939, was a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. It stipulated that the two nations would not attack each other for 10 years, and it also included a secret protocol that divided spheres of influence in Eastern Europe. Italy. Mussolini's aims for Italian diplomacy. In line with the aggressive nationalism that characterized fascism, the main aim of Mussolini's foreign policy was to make Italy great, respected, and feared. He declared that the 20th century will be a century of Italian power. In the period from the end of the First World War until Mussolini's rise to power in 1922, Italy had been neither great, respected, nor feared. The Paris peace settlement had not granted Italy many of the territorial rewards it had expected as a result of its contribution to the Allied victory. To the majority of Italians, this was both humiliating and a reflection of their government's weakness. Mussolini was determined to establish Italy's credibility as a major European power, and his early actions certainly seemed to reflect these grand aims. Fiume. March 1923. Italy's claim to the city and its surrounding area, based on the fact that the majority of its population was Italian, had been rejected by the Paris peacemakers. Instead, they had declared Fiume a free city that was to be used jointly by Italy and Yugoslavia. An Italian poet and nationalist, Gabriele D'Annunzio, led a force of around 300 ex-soldiers into Fiume in September 1919 and declared it part of Italy. The Italian government sent in troops and forced D'Annunzio to leave the city so as not to piss off the League. To the anger of the Italian nationalists, the government renounced its claim to Fiume. Later, in March 1923, the local government in Fiume became threatened with rebellion and revolution, and Mussolini ordered Italian troops to move in and restore order. Yugoslavia had little choice but to accept the situation, and Fiume effectively became part of Italy. The Corfu Incident, August 1923. and Greece consistently showed little willingness to cooperate with the Commission, and when Tellini and 3 of his Italian assistants were killed by unknown assailants. Mussolini was convinced that Greece was responsible. Italy sent an ultimatum to Greece, demanding financial compensation and the execution of those responsible. When these conditions were not met, Mussolini ordered the bombardment and occupation of the Greek island of Corfu, resulting in the deaths of a number of civilians. Despite an appeal to the League of Nations, Greece was forced to apologize and pay the full amount of compensation. Italy demanded 50 million lira in exchange for the withdrawal of Italian troops from Corfu. Although Mussolini had refused to accept the League of Nations' right to determine the outcome of this issue, Italy's success in the matter heightened his prestige. Friendly relations, 1923 to 1934. He attended the Locarno Conference in 1925, where he forged effective working relationships with representatives from Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium. Italy became the second European country after Britain to formally recognize the USSR, and Mussolini signed a non-aggression treaty with the Soviets in 1933. The Stresa Front, as the resulting alliance became known, condemned Germany's actions. It reaffirmed the Locarno treaties, pledged continued support for Austrian independence, and asserted its intention to resist Germany's attempts to increase its armaments. Despite all this, the Stresa Front took no practical action against Hitler. No Anschluss. Hitler intended to force a union between Germany and Austria in July 1934 as a result of domestic instability caused by Nazi Austrians. Hitler's troops were ready to enter Austria on the pretext of restoring order, but in the event, they were forced to back down when Mussolini sent Italian regiments to the Austrian border. Hitler had no alternative but to deny any involvement in the actions taken by the Austrian Nazis. 1935 Aggression. In October 1935, Mussolini ordered the invasion of Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia, the only remaining independent state in Africa. This was not the first time Italy had attempted to seize Abyssinia. An invasion in 1896 had ended in an embarrassing defeat at the Battle of Adwa. Now Mussolini was determined to succeed where others had failed, arguing that this colonial expansion would provide Italy with much-needed raw. Mussolini suggested an anti-French Italo-German alliance in 1932 before Hitler assumes power. The German government responded favorably, albeit with the condition that Germany needed to rearm first. On 25 October 1936, Mussolini agreed to form a Rome-Berlin Axis, sanctioned by a cooperation agreement with Nazi Germany and signed in Berlin. The following month, in 1936, he joined the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany and Japan. In 1938, Mussolini was initially against Austrian Anschluss, largely due to his concern that Hitler would eventually press for the return of Italian territories which had once been ruled by Austria. Mussolini went so far as mobilize troops to the north. The failure of efforts to stop Hitler, and as a result of the events of the Abyssinian War, obliged Italy to accept a compromise with Germany over Austria. The Pact of Steel, formerly known as the Pact of Friendship and Alliance between Germany and Italy, was a military and political alliance between Germany and Italy, signed in 1939. The pact was initially drafted as a tripartite military alliance between Japan, Italy, and Germany. During the Spanish Civil War, Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini actively supported the nationalist faction, led by General Francisco Franco. This support included sending military personnel, equipment, and financial aid to combat the Spanish Republican forces. Albania, 1939. Emboldened by Hitler's invasion of Czechoslovakia, Italian troops invaded Albania in April 1939. This was little more than a propaganda exercise, since Albania had long been effectively under Italian control anyway. However, it enhanced Mussolini's image as a conquering hero who was leading Italy back to its former glory. Spain, 1939 Non-Intervention Committee. When the Republican government of Spain asked for British and French assistance against Franco, politicians in those countries adopted a more pragmatic approach. Desperate to avoid any action that might provoke Germany, Britain established a non-intervention committee to ensure that no foreign aid entered Spain. Germany and Italy joined the committee, but both ignored it. Germany and Italian involvement. Realizing that taking full control of Spain was going to be difficult, Franco appealed to Hitler and Mussolini for assistance, claiming that he was fighting to prevent a communist revolution in Spain. Neither Hitler nor Mussolini had any real interest in Spain, but both could see the value of having a third fascist state in Europe, especially one that was situated on France's southern border. Consequently, both Germany and Italy supplied Franco with military equipment and troops, 10 total. Italy provided the nationalists with around 700 planes, 150 tanks, 800 artillery pieces, 10,000 machine guns, and 240,000 rifles and 50,000 troops. Soviet involvement. Soviet leader Stalin also had a vested interest in prolonging the Spanish Civil War. Sensing that the fascist governments of Germany and Italy posed the greatest threat to the security of the Soviet Union, Stalin had worked hard to maintain good relations with both Britain and France. While he certainly did not want Franco to take control of Spain, which would pose yet another fascist threat to the USSR, he was also aware that neither Britain nor France would tolerate a communist government in Spain. As a result, Stalin authorized just enough aid to ensure that the Republicans could maintain their resistance, but not enough to enable them to gain outright victory. Gentlemen's Agreement, Easter Accords. The Gentlemen's Agreement of 1937 refers to a series of agreements reached between the United Kingdom and Italy, primarily regarding naval patrols in the Mediterranean Sea during the Spanish Civil War. Agreements concluded between the British and the Italian governments in Rome on 16 April 1938 to facilitate the Italian government's cooperation in keeping the existing world order and to prevent it from allying with Germany. 1939 Reasons for Franco's victories. In January 1939, Barcelona finally fell to the nationalists. Madrid fell 2 months later. The nationalists were victorious. Why was Franco able to win? He had managed to maintain the unity of right-wing groups: the church, the army, monarchists, the phalangists, Spanish fascists. The Republicans were far less unified, the various left-wing groups all having their own, often contradictory aims. Unlike the well-trained professional soldiers. Germany. The Weimar Republic was Germany's democratic government from 1919 to 1933, following the end of World War I, and the abdication of Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II. Named after the city where its government was initially formed, the Republic faced significant challenges, including economic hardship, political instability, and the rise of extremist parties like the Nazis. 1923 hyperinflation and Ruhr. Hyperinflation. Caused to pay for the striking workers and cover other expenses, the German government printed more money, leading to hyperinflation. Effects: the value of the German mark plummeted, causing prices to rise rapidly. The role of the Ruhr in hyperinflation. The occupation of the Ruhr, and the subsequent strikes and passive resistance, created a financial burden on the German government. To meet this financial burden, the government printed more money, accelerating the already existing hyperinflation. The Ruhr occupation is considered a key factor in the escalation of hyperinflation during 1923. 1925 Mein Kampf wrote that Germans were members of a master race called Aryans, and all non-Aryans were inferior. He declared that Germans needed Lebensraum, living space, and should conquer Eastern Europe and Russia. He called the Treaty of Versailles an outrage, and vowed to regain land taken from Germany. Hitler appointed Chancellor. On 30 January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Unlike Franco, who gained power by the use of violence, and Mussolini, who secured control by the threat of violence, Hitler became German Chancellor through legal and constitutional means. He exploited the weaknesses of Germany to gain support. Aims and strategies of Hitler's foreign policy in Germany was to be restored to its rightful position as a major European power and undo the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler intended to achieve this by recovering all lost territory, including the Polish Corridor 1939 and the Saar coalfields 1935. Developing the German Army, Navy and Air Force 1935, forming a Union Anschluss between Germany and Austria 1938, and reuniting all German-speaking people under the government of Germany. 1939. Expansion to make room for the German people. Lebensraum 1938. The World Disarmament Conference 1932-33. On all of Europe's leading powers had committed themselves to arms reduction both in the Treaty of Versailles and by the Covenant of the League of Nations. With the exception of Germany, no country had honored its commitment. German response, nonetheless, France refused to remove its objections to German rearmament, and this allowed Hitler to find an excuse to withdraw Germany from both the World Disarmament Conference and the League of Nations in 1933, blaming France for his actions. This had the effect of making the French seem unreasonable, as well as causing a rift in relations between France and Britain, both good outcomes for Germany. Poland Non-Aggression Treaty. In January 1934, Hitler signed a 10-year non-aggression treaty with Poland. This was intended to convince the Poles that Germany had no plans to take back the Polish corridor, and to guarantee Polish neutrality if Germany decided to take action against Austria or Czechoslovakia. Rearmament Wehrmacht. Developing his armed forces was Hitler's next objective. In March 1935 he reintroduced conscription, claiming that this was in response to increases in the British Air Force, and the announcement that France was to extend its conscription from 12 to 18 months. Hitler also declared his intention to increase the German army to a strength of 600,000 men, 6 times higher than that permitted by the Treaty of Versailles. Concerned about the possible implications of German rearmament, Britain, France, and Italy met at Stresa in northern Italy to discuss the issue. Rearmament naval, and realizing the weaknesses of the Stresa front, Hitler set about exploiting them. In June 1935, he signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, agreeing to limit the German Navy to 35% of the strength of the British Navy. While this guaranteed British naval supremacy, Britain was effectively condoning a transgression of the Treaty of Versailles, which limited the naval army of Germany to almost nothing. Remilitarization of Rhineland. Hitler's foreign policy thus far had been based on the assumption that none of the other major European countries would take serious action against him. In March 1936, Hitler decided to take another gamble. In defiance of both the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties, German soldiers entered the demilitarized Rhineland, which directly contravened the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties. In March 1936, Germany's remilitarization of the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone under the Treaty of Versailles, was met with minimal response from Britain and France. Both nations, fearing war and influenced by public opinion that viewed the Treaty of Versailles as too harsh on Germany, chose not to enforce the treaty or challenge Hitler's actions. This inaction emboldened Hitler and paved the way for further aggressive actions in the coming year. Italian diplomacy with Germany in the 1930s. Mussolini suggested an anti-French Italo-German alliance in 1932 before Hitler assumes power. The German government responded favorably, albeit with the condition that Germany needed to rearm first. On 25 October 1936, Mussolini agreed to form a Rome-Berlin axis, sanctioned by a cooperation agreement with Nazi Germany and signed in Berlin. In 1936 he joined the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan and later in 1937 with Italy. In March 1938, Hitler finally achieved Anschluss with Austria following riots. As before, Britain and France protested but took no direct action. The failure of efforts to stop Hitler, his alliance with Hitler, and as a result of the events of the Abyssinian War, obliged Italy to accept a compromise with Germany over Austria. The Axis agreement with Germany was strengthened by signing the Pact of Steel on 22 May 1939, which bound together Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany in a full military alliance, pledging mutual support in the event. Germany and Spanish Civil War. And Hitler was motivated to support Franco's forces in the Spanish Civil War. Franco's victory would ensure an additional fascist dictator in Europe and provide naval stations for Germany. Hitler encouraged Italian involvement in Spain in an effort to distract Mussolini from Germany's own plans to force a union with Austria. To prolong the Spanish Civil War, Germany not only supplied Franco's nationalists with men and equipment, but Hitler also allowed German firms to sell arms to the Republicans. Anschluss. That Hitler fully intended to force a union between Germany and Austria became clear in July 1934. With encouragement from the Führer, Austrian Nazis staged a revolt and murdered the Austrian Chancellor, Engelbert Dollfuss. Hitler's troops were ready to enter Austria on the pretext of restoring order. But in the event they were forced to back down when Mussolini sent Italian regiments to the Austrian border. This unexpected setback highlighted the fact that Germany did not yet possess the military strength to risk a war against Italy, and Hitler had no alternative but to deny any involvement in the actions taken by the Austrian Nazis. To March 1938, Hitler finally achieved Anschluss with Austria, in clear defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. Following riots and demonstrations organized by Austrian Nazis, which the government of Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg was powerless to control, German troops moved in and declared Austria part of. British and French reaction. France was in no position to challenge Germany since it faced severe economic issues, although there were some in the British government such as Churchill who wanted strong action against Germany. Munich Conference, and as the prospect of war increased, a four-power conference was held in Munich on 29 September 1938. Hitler, Mussolini, Chamberlain and Daladier discussed the best way of resolving the problem of Czechoslovakia. It was agreed that Germany should take immediate possession of the Sudetenland. The Czech government was not invited to the meeting. It was simply informed that if it refused to abide by the decisions reached at Munich, it could expect no assistance from either Britain or France. With resistance hopeless, the Czech government agreed. And at a private meeting on 30 September, Chamberlain and Hitler signed a document renouncing warlike intentions and agreeing to deal with any future issues by negotiation. Hitler takes Czechoslovakia. And on 15 March 1939, German troops crossed the Czech border. Once again, Britain and France took no action. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. A country that had been created as part of the Paris peace settlement had survived for just 20 years. Hitler was now convinced that Britain and France would never declare war on Germany. This time, however, his instincts were wrong. Whereas his earlier actions could be justified by the claim that he was redressing the unfair terms of the Treaty of Versailles, his acquisition of Czechoslovakia was different. He had seized territory over which Germany had no justifiable right and broken the promises he had made at Munich. No longer could Hitler claim that he had only peaceful intentions. British rearmament. Faced with the prospects of another war, Chamberlain came on the airways expressing that war was likely, and that the British value freedom above peace. In the years leading to this assessment, the British changed their policy of military cutbacks, started as early as the end of the Great War, what was known as the 10-year rule. And as international tension increased with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the British government appointed a subcommittee to investigate. War now seemed likely, and the threat would be with Japan and Germany. Demands on Poland. Despite the warnings of his army generals, Hitler remained convinced that he could continue his aggressive foreign policy without other major European powers intervening. He argued that it would be impossible to maintain the German economy without invading other countries or attacking other people's possessions. Hitler now turned his attention to Poland. In April 1939, he insisted on the return of Danzig and German access across the Polish corridor. In some ways, these were understandable demands. Danzig's population was largely German-speaking, while the Polish corridor had split East Prussia from the rest of Germany. The Nazi-Soviet pact. And just as Stalin feared and hated Germany's fascist government, so Hitler had spent his entire political career denouncing communism. While yet, to the astonishment of the rest of Europe, Germany and the USSR signed a treaty of friendship and non-aggression on 24 August 1939. The Nazi-Soviet pact, also known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was outwardly a treaty of non-aggression and ending trade, and secret part of the agreement contained a promise of Stalin's non-intervention in Germany's invasion of Poland. Hitler promised that the USSR would receive eastern parts of Poland, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia. Events leading to the invasion of Poland. With Soviet neutrality now assured, there seemed to be nothing stopping Hitler from carrying out his planned invasion of Poland. Although Britain had guaranteed support for Poland, Hitler remained convinced that this was a bluff. Despite the urging of his generals, he remained convinced that Chamberlain and Daladier were weak and would seek some compromise. Moreover, he felt that German blitzkrieg in Poland will be so rapid that the British and French would not have time to react. On August 31, 1939, Nazi soldiers wearing Polish uniforms staged an attack on a German radio station, hoping to fool the world that the Polish began the conflict. On 1 September 1939, German troops crossed the border into Poland.